what we're looking for is that you identify the system in which the flower is utilized for. So in this case, the flower is the reproductive organ. It's the reproductive organ that's responsible for making seeds. Its strong odor attracts what that helps transport what from the stamen to the what. So your blank should read like this. It's a strong odor attracts pollinators that help transport the pollen from the stamen to the pistil. Yeah, and if you wanted to put down on that last part, if instead of pistil you wanted to put stigma, that would be okay. So then let's take a look at the parts of the flower, which we've gone over these before, so this should be a review for you. But what do we have for the different parts or the different anatomy pieces of this flower? So around the outside of the flower, we have the petals. And the petals actually are really big indicators as to what type of plant it is, right? Monocot or dicot. So you could label your diagram starting with a petal. Great. So at the base of the flower, we have little leaves that are called sepals. Okay. So at the base here of the female portion of the plant, we have the widest area being the ovary. The piece of the plant that we have that branches out from the ovary then is what we call the style. And then up here at the top, what do we call the top portion of the female pieces? The stigma. Now all together, so those three pieces all together make up the, which is the pistil. Good. And if you want to put that on there, I would highly recommend it. It is the female part. So then let's talk about what we have for the male part. So this portion of the diagram coming off here is the good. Top part here we have as the anther. And then the piece that branches out of the anther is the, okay, good, the filament. And both pieces together make the stamen, which is the male part. Okay. Now, again, we know that this particular flower is a perfect flower because it has both the male and female parts, excuse me. So I would maybe label that because at this point that's knowledge that you have and you know. So it's a perfect flower, i.e. both male and female. Oops, male, excuse me, and female parts. On the back of your flap, I want you to put, so I'm talking on the back side of the flap, a comparison of a monocot and dicot. So what do we know about monocots and what do we know about dicots when it comes to flowers? Excuse me, when we're talking about a monocot, we know it's a monocot flower because monocot flowers come in multiples of 3, whereas a dicot comes in multiples of 4 or 5. Okay, so kind of create a T-chart on the back of your flap just to consolidate down those properties of a monocot and a dicot. So for the fill in the blanks, you should have leaves collect light energy from the sun. The energy is used to produce, you could also say to make, food through a process called photosynthesis. The leaves also have openings called stoma, and we're going to clarify why that's not referred to as a stomata here in a little bit when we talk about the structures that we see on a leaf. But the opening itself is called a stoma that help with gas exchange and transpiration. So for your guys' clarification, transpiration is one of the terms that we haven't really talked about much. And when we talk about transpiration, what we're referring to is the movement of water. Okay, so we move gas in and out of a leaf in a plant, but we also have to move water or some of those macronutrients through. Transpiration would be the process in which that occurs. When we talk about the structures of a leaf itself, the first thing that comes to mind is the reason why is a leaf green? And we know it's green because of chlorophyll. There's other colors of chlorophyll that can be in a leaf too, but go ahead and just draw on just some little structures that you could label as chlorophyll. Excuse me, the chlorophyll itself is located within a chloroplast. And if we were to kind of draw what that looks like, you tend to have like this little vessel. So this would be the chloroplast. And inside of that you have these stacks of green discs, which are chlorophyll. Okay. One of the things that we know that is so important about chloroplast or chlorophyll is the fact that that's the site of photosynthesis. So that's where we see this process of food production occurring. Now, in order for photosynthesis to occur, or for the material that we need for photosynthesis to get into that site, we need openings in the leaf. Okay, and those openings, which we already referred to, are called a stoma. And if you were to draw these on, you could just draw maybe a few openings on the leaf. But if we were to look at those close up, they're going to look something like this. And in the middle, we have the opening, the stoma. Around the outside, however, we have two cells that are called guard cells. And we talked about turgor pressure. We talked about the ability for cells to absorb or take in more water or take in less water. And what happens is when the stoma need to open up, those cells are going to have an exchange of water in them. So they can either swell up in order to open or relax by releasing water out of them. So the cells themselves aren't always open. That stoma is not always open. But when it is open, what does a plant take in? What do we know? What gas does a plant take in through its leaves? Great. So we know for a fact that carbon dioxide is going to enter in. And at the same time, a plant is giving off a gas. What gas does a plant give off? Colin? Great. So it'll give off oxygen. Two very critical gases that are utilized in the process of photosynthesis. Other terms which we've already mentioned, we have the veins. And then we have a label for what the outer surface of something is. What's the outer surface of a leaf called? So the outer surface, or the surface area of the leaf, could be referred to as the epidermis. You can call it the upper epidermis if you're talking about the outer layer. It's kind of like your skin. You have an epidermis layer, but you also have an upper middle layer if you were to look at it from a cross-section. But we know that that's referred to as the epidermis of a leaf. The important things to keep in mind when we're comparing a monocot to a dicot. Comes down specifically to the vein structure, and we already mentioned this as well. So in a monocot, the leaves have veins that are parallel. Whereas in a dicot, you have a leaf with veins that branch. So if you were ever asked to identify if a plant was a monocot or dicot, you could do that by looking at the vein structure in the plant itself. Okay, so when we get down to the part of the stem, here's what we have for our fill in the blank. The job of the stem is to hold the leaves high so that they can collect light energy. It also helps transport water and nutrients. In vessels called the xylem and phloem. When we talk about a comparison of stem cross sections, monocot versus dicot, here's what we see. So this should be on the back side of your flap of your notes page. But monocot versus dicot, we have our cross section of the stem showing a difference in where the vascular bundles are arranged. So in our monocot, we have kind of what I would say like a salami looking cross section. It's just arranged kind of sporadic. The vascular bundles are all throughout the stem cross section. And the dicot, however, we have vascular bundles arranged in a ring around the cross section. So it's kind of this imaginary circle or area in which they can be located. Again, we call these bundles vascular bundles. So the actual entire bundle of cells is called a vascular bundle. And to be more specific as far as what those bundles are made of, we have parts of the plant, the xylem and the phloem, that comprise portions of that vascular bundle. Now, there's kind of a trick to remembering which portion is what. When we talk about the xylem, it's always the portion of the vascular bundle that's towards the center of the stem. So half of like your dicot bundles, and I'm just going to color them in blue for now, the inner portion of that bundle is all xylem cells. So that's the xylem. And I might even say xylem tubes to be more specific because they're not necessarily a cell. They don't have a nucleus, but it's a transport system. Think of a straw. Okay? And if you take a handful of straws and you hold them together and you were to cut them off, it's a bundle of a bunch of straws. And that's what the xylem kind of is. It's a bundle of all these little straws going up from the roots to the stem. In the same fashion for a monocot xylems are located towards the center of the plant. So even though these vascular bundles are arranged kind of sporadically, the inner portion is still the xylem tubes. So that's still xylem. On the outer edge, in comparison, we have the phloem. So the outer portions of these bundles are all the phloem, or the location of where we have the phloem. So again, the outermost portion of each vascular bundle. The phloem. Other parts that we would identify include the outer edge of a stem. It's no different than when we talk about the outer surface of a leaf. We refer to an outer surface, so like this green area, as the epidermis. Okay, so that outermost edge. And we can have different layers that we could label as well to be more specific. But at this point, it's just really important that you guys know that there's vascular bundles, which are used to transport water and nutrients. The xylem is always located on the inner portion of that bundle towards the center of the stem. The phloem is located towards the outer. Other things The xylem are usually larger openings than the phloem, but that's kind of more details than what you have to know. What I want you guys to put on the side of your flap where the stem is drawn, you're going to create a diagram of what a xylem looks like versus what a phloem looks like, because they do function differently. So a xylem, first of all, is going to be used to transport the water and nutrients from the roots to the leaves, meaning it's always pulling stuff up the plant. Okay, so this is why it's really important that we have moisture in our soil, because it's going to be wicked up through the plant to the leaves. So transport from the roots to the leaves. And if we were to look at a section of xylem, it's actually kind of boring in comparison to the phloem, I think. Mostly because water will travel up this in kind of an entire long channel. It's not broke out. It's not a bunch of like chambers. It just travels straight up the xylem tube up to the leaves. But a phloem, which is more systemic, meaning it's going to spread throughout the plant, it's going to take nutrients from the leaves to different parts of the plant. It might need it in a stem, it might need it at the roots, but phloem can take nutrients and water in different directions. So the phloem itself is going to be a systematic transport of nutrients. Mainly your sugars, right? Sugar is produced from what process? Photosynthesis. And once it's produced, it has to travel somewhere because we need energy provided to our cells. Who remembers what part of the cell actually utilizes the energy or is able to convert energy? There's a specific organelle within a cell. So when we're talking about where energy is produced at the cellular level, we're talking about the mitochondria. A phloem, the structure of the phloem, is actually a bunch of these chambers that are interconnected. And it kind of reminds me of how our spirogyia looked a little bit. But what we can see is, we can see movement up, but they can also process movement down. And those are going to be located all the way throughout the stem, branching out to the leaves, and it's so critical for sugar transport. I'm going to write that there. Sugar transport is necessary to have the phloem in order to accomplish that. The last part, the roots, and we're not going to get into too many details about the roots. They are important. They're actually probably one of the most important structures of the plant. It's the first structure that emerges, right, out of the cotyledon. It's the only way for our plants to actually obtain nutrients aside from what it requires from the gas around the leaves and the sunlight energy itself. But the fill-in-the-blank part of this, we're talking about the job of the roots is to absorb water and minerals from the soil and to store food for the plant. When we talked about monocot and dicot properties for roots, we talked about how the structure itself looked different depending on the type of plant it was. So our monocot plants are very fibrous, and it's just like the image already provided on your example here. There's just a lot of kind of stringy, thin roots. A dicot, on the other hand, has one main root. Okay, so one main root that maybe has little fibers or root hairs hanging off of it. And what we call that root is we call that a taproot. That would be things like carrots. It tends to be roots that we eat. So a carrot. A potato would be the same thing. It would be a taproot in which we eat. The monocot root is referred to as a fibrous root. And as far as the root system is concerned, we know that it's requiring, it's important for absorption, okay? And that's already written into this sentence. It's required for absorption. We also know that roots are important for what else?
To hold the plant where it is.
Yeah, to hold the plant where it's at, or anchoring the plant itself. Okay, so that would be the other significant thing that you would maybe want to reference when it comes to roots. Okay, so that's the system of the plant as a whole, starting with the flower, the leaves, the stem, and then the roots. This particular example is an example of a monocot. So as we were going through those different properties of a monocot or dicot, the example on your actual flip book that you have is a monocot. So we would see some different things in dicots, and we'll dive into some of those different properties a little bit down the road. But it is significant to note that every vocabulary word or every term that we added today is something that would be fair game on your quizzes and your tests. So this is going to be a very critical tool for you to utilize to go back and study. In this case, you would maybe want to go back and highlight the words fibrous root, taproot. Try and define that yourself. How would you define taproot? How would you define fibrous root? And then you can practice how that would look on a quiz itself. Questions you guys have?